So now we'll move to questions. I see a number of questions have come in already. Thank you very much for all the questions. I'll just take a few of the questions to start with, and then I will pass over to David. So first off, some of the questions coming in. So I'll start off on active farmer. I was not an active farmer in 22. Can I apply to BISS and other schemes in the new CAP programme? So you must be an active farmer in 23 in order to apply for the schemes. So once you are carrying out an agricultural activity, you are taking the risk, then you can apply for the schemes that we've talked about in 23. Then there's, just go through the questions as they come in. So will a leased entitlement qualify for CRISS? So as I said, CRISS, the requirement for CRISS is that you must have at least one payment entitlement. That payment entitlement can be leased, rented or owned. There's no differentiation. So yes, a leased entitlement will qualify you for payment under CRISS. There's a number of questions have come in asking what schemes can I apply for? Can I apply for all of the schemes? Yes, the answer is all of the schemes that we're talking about, you can apply for them, and it's really important if you are making the application yourself that you make sure that you've correctly applied for all of the schemes that you wish to apply for. Then another question, do you automatically apply for CRISS when you apply for BISS? No, it's not automatic. You need to select that you want to apply for the CRISS scheme. So that is really important. And then there's a number of questions on entitlements. So as I said, entitlements webinar will take place next Tuesday, so please do join. But just to say, one of the questions is, will farmer get a statement of their payment entitlements? Yes, the payment entitlements, the statement of the payment entitlements will issue in the coming weeks, so all farmers will receive that. But please do join the webinar next Tuesday. Then I've covered that question already. So then, what criteria to be eligible for the new CRISS, the front loading scheme? So again, that's you need to have at least one payment entitlement, and of course you need to have an eligible hectare, as Thomas has explained. So you need an agricultural area carrying out an agricultural activity, and you need to be the person carrying out the agricultural activity to satisfy the active farmer. Another question on entitlements. Have BISS payment entitlement values changed for 23, and how do I find out the new value? So that will be included in yes, the values have changed. All the values have changed, and the statement of payment entitlements will issue in the coming weeks by the middle of March. I leased land and entitlements from my neighbour on a 5-year lease in 2019. Can I still use these in BISS? Where does he stand with active farmer rules? So it's a very good question. So if you have leased the land, you're carrying out the agricultural activity on that land, then you should be the person claiming that land. So if the farmer, that's the land should be included on your BISS application. For the other farmer that leased the land to you, then in order for him to apply, he would need other land, of course, and he would need to be carrying out an agricultural activity in order to satisfy the active farmer. And then there's a number of questions on topics that will be covered in future webinars. So how do I take geotag photos? So that will be covered on Thursday's webinar, so please do join that. Then there's a question on acres. How do I find out if I've been approved into acres? So I understand the approval letters for acres will issue towards the end of this week and the early part of next week. So you should receive your approval letter in the coming week or so. Then I think that's all for me at the moment. David, I might pass over to you.
Yeah, okay, thanks Mary. Okay, so I'll take a chunk of the eco ones here, so I'll go through them pretty quickly. So question here, is the eco scheme payment made in all eligible hectares? Yes, it is. Next one, is it possible to see what space for nature is allocated per parcel, possibly losing leased land and trying to see the effect it has? Yes, it is. So when you go into your BISS application now for 23, there's going to be an eco scheme tab there, and it is going to list for all the parcels you claimed in 2022, the space for nature percentage that each of them contributes, and it's defaulted to the most beneficial. So if, for argument's sake, you have a hedge and there's some bit of scrub within the parcel, whichever is the most beneficial, but you can choose not to claim one of them, and you will see the impact it has on your space for nature percentage, which will be listed in the top right hand corner. Next one is 60 to 65 euros a hectare on all land, or just the space for nature land? No, so it's on all your land. So if, for argument's sake, for simple maths for me, if you had 100 hectares and your space for nature is 15%, you are going to receive, once you apply for the scheme and meet the commitments, 100 hectares by this, whatever the payment rate ends up being set, somewhere around 60 to 65 euros a hectare. Okay, so moving on down. Can I plant trees in the 7% area set aside for nature, so the space for nature? So if you come into agricultural practice 4 and, for argument's sake, you're going to plant the 3 trees per hectare, it's entirely up to yourself where you're going to plant those trees. There will be a couple of restrictions. So you cannot plant them on SAC or Natura land, and you can't plant them on other particular parcels that we've identified, in particular one around breeding waders. But other than that, it's free to yourselves to decide within reason where they're best placed to deliver on your farm. If hedgerows or trees have already been planted in the past 5 years, can these be used as the trees for agricultural practice 4? No, they can't, but those hedges or trees will and can contribute towards your space for nature percentages. So important, once again, to check that the hedges and other beneficial features that we've mapped for you recognize those hedges or trees if you've planted them over the past 5 years. Will a planner or advisor be needed to tell where the trees or hedges are planted? No, they won't. Or can they be planted in an existing boundary fences? So you will see all the details set out on page 24 and 25 of the BISS terms and conditions, the requirements for this, but they can be planted. You can choose to plant the trees or the new hedge into a gappy hedge if that's what you so wish to do. But where you do plant them on an external boundary, you must make sure that you can actually maintain both sides of that new hedge or line of trees that you're going to plant. AP4, if chosen for 5 years, must you plant 3 trees every year? No. So if, for argument's sake, my 100 hectare example, in 2023 I choose it, I must plant 300 trees in 2023. I do not have to plant another 300 trees in each of the following 5 years unless I choose it as my action. What I was trying to say is, if you plant them in 2023, you must maintain them for the duration of the program. You can't plant them in 2023 and come along in 2024, apply for something else and dig them up. So you must maintain them for the 5 years of the program. Moving on down here then. If the time to plant bare root trees is November to March and the end date to plant them on this scheme is the 30th of September, have we now missed the option to enter that agricultural practice if no trees were planted this year? So to put simply, I was always told you can plant trees in any month that has an hour in it, so that's from September up to April. So any farmer that's planted them since the 1st of October last year, obviously up to they can plant them up to the 30th of September, fully accepting they can't plant them during the summer, but so we don't see any reason why someone should not be able to meet this commitment in 23 where they choose to do it. Where can we find our percentage space for nature figures that have been estimated for us? So once you now log into your 2023 BISS application and Ag-Food, as Mary went through, you're going to see your space for nature percentage up there in the right hand side along with this other GAIC 8%, so that's where you'll see it. Is there a max benefit for the eco scheme? No, there's not. So there's a payment for each and every eligible hectare. There's no max area or payment set down, at least not for 2023 anyway, albeit the scheme will have to be reviewed at the end of 2023 because it's an annual agri-environment scheme as I outlined at the start. Can I, next one here now, just 1 second. For the eco scheme, if you have more than the 10% of hazel/scrub areas, do you have to fence them areas off from livestock or not to fulfill your 2 measures? No. So the list of features we've listed and already mapped those features for you. So in many cases, there's hedges, stone walls that have obviously been in place for many years. In many cases, they'll be stock-proof themselves. So there is no requirement to fence them off. However, if of course you come along and you plant new trees or hedges, either under acres or acres, well then a part and parcel of that is you must fence them and protect them to make sure they do establish. Just another couple, Mary, before I hand back to you. Do acres options qualify for space for nature, e.g. tree planting or hedgerow planting? No. So if you do trees or hedges in acres, you are getting paid for those hedges the hedge or the trees that you plant in acres over the next 5 years. So they cannot contribute towards your space for nature over the next 5 years, because put simply, you're getting paid for those trees in acres already. I have the next question of a stream flowing through the land, would it qualify for eco? It hasn't been identified in the map. No, so streams don't qualify. So page 19 of the BISS terms and conditions lists all the features that qualify, and rivers won't be indoor streams. How much, sorry, next question, how much is eco per hectare? So that's 65 euros, as we said already. And then one more, maybe before I hand back to you, Mary, if I find one more. No, so, oh yeah, sorry, very last one, and then I'll hand back to Mary. So will the department's pilot soil sampling program, which was completed in October 2022 on my farm, suffice for soil samples under Agricultural Practice 6? No, because you must incur the costs in the scheme of eco. So unfortunately, even if you've took those samples in the National Soil Sampling Programme for 2022, if you do wish to do AP6 in eco schemes, you are going to have to take fresh samples, because if you don't incur the cost, whether that be trees or limiting chemical action, whatever it is, you cannot be compensated again in eco for them. So Thomas, I'll hand over to yourself then if you want to take a chunk of questions on your side.
Yeah, I might just a couple there I might take before hand it back to Mary, if that's okay. So look, there's a couple of questions there that I'm going to sort of take together. They're asking about removal of scrub or removal of hedgerows and what's allowed and not allowed. So first question here relates to ANC land, but it's in a callows, and can a farmer do invasive species, or sorry, invasive work like rotivating, cleaning out drains, scrub, things like that? So look, if land is designated, so it's an SSE or an SPA, there is a requirement that to check with National Parks and Wildlife, because certain actions are what are called ARCs. They require consent, activities requiring consent. So if you are considering and you are in Natura doing those sort of activities, you would need to consult with the NPWS. Where land is not in the Natura area, is in not SSE or SPA, and a farmer is wondering about scrub removal or hedgerow removal. So to be clear, if land is considered a beneficial feature and we're accounting for it and we're giving payment for it, that doesn't mean that the farmer cannot remove it. If a farmer wants to remove it, they would have to comply with the standard rules that already exist with regard to removal of scrub areas. So you cannot remove it at this time of the year. So it's the same as hedge cutting, so it can only be done in the open period. It can't be done at the moment, the closed period. If you're doing large scale, be it hedgerow removal or scrub removal, it is possible that you may have to look for an environmental impact assessment and ask, so that's if you're doing large scale amounts of removal. And while tonight isn't around the conditionality, there is one issue that if you do remove a hedgerow, again, it's not banned under the CAP schemes, but you have to plant at double the length prior to removal. So I suppose in summary, there are a number of things to consider if people are looking or considering removal of scrub or removing of hedgerows, and some of it's dependent on whether they're in mature areas, but in all cases, the time of the year is critical. And I suppose from the department's perspective, a lot of this land now is brought into the eligible hectare, so it's being paid on, and people shouldn't feel the need to remove it to deliver on payments. Okay. There's another question there just specifically asking about the eligibility of forestry land and the change. So previously we would have referenced in the past that for land to be planted and become eligible for forestry, to be deemed forestry eligible and draw down a BPS payment and get the forestry grant, that it had to have been eligible in 08. And there's a question there about the fact that that's been removed from the terms and conditions. So all that means is that in the BISS scheme that we're in now, that for land to be draw down the forestry premia and the BISS payment entitlements, it must have been eligible in the BPS scheme period. So if you already have land planted and it was forestry, that carries over, there's nothing changed. But in terms of going forward, if we're thinking of planted land, that land must have drawn down a payment sometime within the BPS for it to be considered. Okay. There's a number of questions there around the the maps that we provide, and if a farmer wants to make changes to those maps. So where a farmer or an agent wants to amend land because there are features, for example, a house site that hasn't been deducted, the system allows for that, and there's help videos, as Mary has mentioned. If a farmer or agent has identified that there is a feature not mapped, so for example, a bit of scrub, the capacity is there to add or remove those features. But as David has said already, where a farmer is comfortably above a threshold, 17 or 18% space for nature, we're not asking that every little bush be added or removed, just in terms of the workload on the advisory system and on farmers. So capacity is there through the system to make those changes, and that involves both the possibility of taking out bits of land and also adding in parcels that you may not have declared. So on the same vein, there's been a couple of questions there asking about the potential of merging or joining parcels together, and what is allowed and what's not allowed. So when it comes to a farmer perhaps having an area of a habitat that had its own parcel, but is adjacent or touching right beside a permanent pasture or grassland field, it is acceptable to request the two of those to be merged together, as long as both parcels are owned by the farmer, that one isn't rented and one isn't owned, and that those lands are not in or have been committed to acres, or that then we can't merge if they're in acres, or I said if one is rented and one is owned. But if not, if the land is owned by the same farmer and it's on the application and they want to just join them together to get it to allow for that maybe a bit of a habitat at the bottom of the land to be included in the eligible hectare, that request can be made through the online application and will be processed by the department internally. And it may well in those situations lead to an increase in the eligible area. Okay, there's another question then just on beneficial features and the inclusion of areas of bog or areas of habitat, and what can be facilitated. So again, as I've just said with the example there on mentioned, yeah, look at habitat or trees can be included. What can't be included and what would not get benefit in terms of the beneficial features and qualifying would be bog or areas that is used solely or mainly for production of our turf cutting. So temporary spread lands, that's okay. But again, back to the idea of predominance. So a commercial bog area or an area that is used mainly for the production of turf, that wouldn't be considered a beneficial feature. But if there is a peat area on the holding or a habitat in the general sense that is a peaty soil, those sort of areas, they could be included or at least presented to the department, and we could look to see whether they meet the rules that are set out already. Okay. So there's another question there. Apologies. There's another question there regarding removing the scrub in 23 or 24. So I've already outlined, from the point of view of the eligible hectare, just because it's part of the eligible hectare doesn't mean you cannot remove it. But in terms of removal, all the things I've already mentioned are really important. So the idea of, the right time of the year, if it's in a designated area, as in it's in natura lands, and also if it's a large scale reworking of land, lot or hedgerow removal, then it may require environmental impact assessment. Okay. Excuse me. So there's a question here again, and I think if as a result of the eligible hectare, a farmer now realizes, well, they've got more eligible land, what does that mean? Well, because the entitlement numbers are fixed, as in the farmer carries over the same number of entitlements, it won't automatically mean more BISS payment, but it will, as David already said, be available to the farm, and in all likelihood will draw down an eco payment, because the eco is not stuck to the number of entitlements that a farmer has. Okay. I might take two more there, and I might pass it back then to you, Mary, to take a few. So there's a question here about what if the maps are out of date and do not accurately show the correct amount of trees or scrub or grass. There's an issue with them. So I've said in those circumstances, the capacity is there to the system to amend, both in terms of adding and removal. And the maps that we have in the mapping system, as in the backdrop, those maps normally are within 2 or 3 years, and they are of what we term very high resolution. So they're about every pixel or every point of them is about 25 centimeters. So in the majority cases, it should reflect what you see on the ground. Obviously, if there's been a new farm building or a roadway or something like that in the last couple or maybe 3 or 4 years in certain parts of the country, it won't be reflected on the imagery, but a farmer can go and our agent and indicate where it is, and we will map it out. And then when the new imagery comes along, we'll be able to see it. Okay. Okay, so the last one I'll take here, then maybe I might hand it back to then Mary. Just again, that there's someone here saying that they got maps in the department and it has the eligible hectare value on it, but it doesn't actually show the reference area. Yeah, so at the moment the reference area is it is calculated on the system, but it's not being displayed. It wasn't sent out on the printed maps. It will be available in the INET system, just not there at the moment. So it's one of those things that we're hoping to get to shortly. So I might pass it back to you for a minute there, Mary. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So question in here, when will terms and conditions of ANC 23 be available on the DAFM website? So they're already on the DAFM website. So if you look under the schemes and payments section, you will see section for ANC, and that'll bring you to the terms and conditions. Just a note of change from previous years. The ANC terms and conditions are now included in a larger set of the BISS terms and conditions. So it's one document which contains the terms and conditions for all of the schemes that we're talking about. So BISS is included in the terms and conditions, CRISS, Eco Scheme, Protein Aid that we'll talk about on Thursday, ANC, and Strong Corporation Measure. They're all in one document on the website. Then there's another question on where exactly will the recordings be available. So they'll be made available on the website, on the CAP updates section of the website. So we'll make them available in the coming days. Then there's a question here on advisors. So could someone come out and see the land and advise? Is it possible to hire an advisor? Yes, it is. It is possible, and there's a list of department approved advisors on the list, so you would need to contact them because they're the only advisors that can operate on your behalf in order to apply for the BISS and other schemes. Then does a young farmer get a top up on payments? Yes, if they're an eligible young farmer, the young farmer scheme will be discussed at the webinar next Tuesday. So I'd urge you to register for that one and to attend. Is there a minimum number of hectares to apply? So in previous years, there was a minimum of 3 hectares to apply, but the minimum that's included for 23 is that for each of the schemes, in order for a payment to be processed, it must be of at least €100. So in order to receive a payment under the BISS, for example, then you'd have to have sufficient a payment entitlement of more than €100 and an eligible hectare to go along with that payment entitlement in order to apply. I'm in the process of renting additional land which has no entitlements. Can I get CRISS on my own land and on the additional land? So yes, you must have one payment entitlement overall, and then the CRISS will be paid on up to the 30 hectares that you claim, whether that land is rented, leased or owned, and would there be no differentiation. So a number of questions on when will the system be open for partnerships and when will I be able to apply when will I be able to apply for BISS? I'm an acres applicant. So the partnerships is something that we're working on. It has caused a problem, but we are working on a solution and we hope to have that resolved in the coming weeks. On acres, so as I said previously, the approvals letters are expected to go out towards the end of this week and early next week. So then once we have resolved once the approval letters have gone out and any necessary mapping has been completed, then the BISS applications will be made available for the acres applicants. So this is something that we're working towards in the next couple of weeks. Then do you need an advisor to apply for these schemes? No, you don't need an advisor to apply for any of these schemes. You can apply yourself by logging on to agfood.ie, But if you don't want to apply yourself, then you can get a department approved advisor, a FOSS approved advisor to act on your behalf. If the entitlements are rented, is it the active farmer leasee or the landowner, the leaser, that qualifies for the CRISS payment? So the active farmer and the person claiming the land is the person that will receive the CRISS payment. And they must have, the person claiming the land and farming the land must have at least one payment entitlement in order to draw down payment. But it's not linked to the value of the entitlements or the number of entitlements that you have. It's just that for each application for a CRISS, the farmer must have at least one payment entitlement. Okay, the next question then, for farmers that previously would have qualified for a very high basic payment scheme, so the BPS payment, maybe up to 100,000 or beyond, is this now capped at 66,000? Yes, all BISS payments, so the payment entitlement payment under the BISS scheme, the replacement for the BPS will be capped effectively at 66,000. Then there's a few questions on the deadline. So you will have received the letter in your BISS pack that said the deadline was the 15th of May 2023. That has since been revised and the deadline is now the 29th of May. So you have a further 2 weeks there to get in your application. But we would urge you to look at the application as early as possible so that you have time to review all of the details, the space for nature estimates, and everything else, so that you have time to make your application. So the 29th of May is the absolute deadline, but please do log on to the system and start your application as soon as possible. Then have details been sent out for next Tuesday's webinar? Yes, they have. So the link that you would received, the text message that went out yesterday, so that will bring you to the details for the 3 webinars. So there'll be 3 links there that you can register for all of the webinars, or you can register for just one of the 2 webinars that are left. Then there's a question, will Space for Nature payment apply to ANC payments, or is there any change to ANC payments in this regard? So there's no change to ANC payments in 23, so the payment rates are the same, but the payment will be based per eligible hectare. So as Thomas has outlined, if the eligible hectare has now included an element of scrub that would previously have been redlined out, then the ANC will be paid on the total of the eligible hectare, including the scrub, for example, in that example. The system wouldn't let me register as didn't get BPS in 21. So I would urge you to contact the contacts for Ag Food, so the cabin number, and there's also an email address available in section 19 of the BISS terms and conditions. Similar for the same, my email address under farm details is wrong. How can I correct? So again, get on to Ag Food, contact details in cabin, and they will correct any of that for you. Where are the terms and conditions of BISS? Where are they? There's none in the posted application recently received. No, so we didn't post out the terms and conditions, but they are available from the department. If you want a printed copy, you can contact the direct payments help desk. So that's the leash number, and we will post out a copy to you if you want copies of the terms and conditions. So David, I might pass over to you now, if that's okay. I think there's a few other questions there on eco-schemes that you might take.
Yeah, okay, thanks Mary. Okay, so starting here at the bottom of the list. So there's just 2 acres questions I'll go through quickly. So will there be another opportunity to apply for acres yet? So we understand there'll be a second tranche later on this year. The next question is acres now closed yet? So it closed back in December and there was just over 46,000 applied for it. Okay, getting back to more specific eco questions. And this one is an important one because it covers a number of areas. And just for clarity, so the question is, how was hedgerow width calculated for Space for Nature? Lost 3.38 acres on that alone, which was tillage land needed for future. So on page 19 of the terms and conditions, it lists all of the different types of features and the weightings that they got. But put simply, the area that we've calculated for you in the space for nature in many cases is a notional area, so to speak. So if, for argument's sake, I have a 10 hectare, my farm is 10 hectares. If I have 1,000 meters of stone walls or hedges, because they're both the same weight, and 1,000 meters of hedging, of internal hedges within that, we take every meter and we notionally multiply it by 10 square meters and say that the space for nature in every square meters is equivalent to 10 square meters. So 1,000 meters of a hedge multiplied by 10,000 or by 10 would be 10,000 square meters equals 1 hectare. In that case, on my 10 hectare holding, I would have made 10%. So in this particular case, it's not that the farmer has lost 3.38 acres. It's a notional area that we're attaching to them. So the weighting for hedges and stone walls is both the same, where they're either internal ones or where it's an external one onto a boundary. If, however, you're sharing a hedge or a stone wall between yourself and your neighbour, both parties can claim that because the weighting is only 5, so there's no fear that we're, so to speak, paying for the same thing twice. So internal, it's 10, external, it's 5, but all of the particular weightings are on page 19 of the BISS terms and conditions. On eco is the €65 paid on 3 or more APs. So the most you can do is 2, and it's €65. The rate will be likely 60 to €65 per hectare on successful delivery of the 2 agricultural practices. Well, nobody likes talking about penalties, I might as well touch on it now. So where the person delivers them, that's what they get. They get paid their 60 or €65, whatever it is. If a farmer fails to deliver one of them, they don't get paid for that one, clearly, and then there's a 10% penalty across whatever their total eco payment would have been. And in the unfortunate case where a farmer selects 2 and does none, they clearly don't get paid, but there's also then a 20% penalty across what they would have been entitled to receive, what their total payment would have been. Okay, question here. I can see that I have attained the space for nature. How can I see each parcel detail? So for that particular person, so if you've seen your space for nature percentage in the top right hand corner, you're inside in the eco scheme. There's a list of the ag practices 1 to 8 that will be eligible, that you are eligible for, and there's a little drop down arrow over on the right hand side, and when you click that, it'll list all your parcels and what each of those parcels contributes towards your space for nature percentage. On adjoining boundary, can both parties claim the same hedgerow? So that's what I touched on a moment ago. So if you have a hedge or a stone wall, for argument's sake, between yourself and your neighbour, that has a weighting of 5, unlike an internal one or one merging onto a roadway or a lane where you have control of both sides. That's at 10. Is there a limit to the maximum percentage you can set aside for space for nature? No, there's not. What percentage of chemical fertilizer must be spread by GPS? So you must where you're choosing AP5 the GPS spreader, you must spread all of your chemical fertilizer through it, and all can't be 0. It's a minimum of 1 ton of fertilizer you must spread through it. So you can't say I'm going to do AP5 but I'm actually not going to spread anything. That's not choosing the action. Okay, moving on here. If you've agreed to plant a hedgerow or tree as part of acres, will this cover you as meeting the criteria for the eco scheme for AP4 as well? No, it won't. They're 2 separate actions. So there's nothing stopping the farmer being in both eco and in acres and committing to do, for argument's sake, 50 trees in eco and 50 trees in acres. There's nothing stopping that, but there must be 100 trees on the whole in that particular example. Okay, so moving on up here. So sorry, no, that question's answered already. Does oilseed rape sown before October 1st qualify as a break crop? No. So the break crop of either oilseed rape, oats, peas or beans must be planted from the 1st of November on, not before the 1st of November. Can I apply for eco schemes, acres and organics? Yes, you can. There's no restriction in being in any or all of those schemes. There will be certain criteria as to what you can choose within them, but on balance, there's no issue in being in all of them, which obviously meet the commitments. Trees or hedges have to be imported or have to be native to Ireland. So the requirement around AP4, they're all set down in the terms and conditions. So you must purchase them and they must come from of Irish provenance. So that's set down within AP4. So around page 21 or 22 in the BISS terms and conditions. Will trees planted as part of an acre's riparian zone also cover the eco scheme AP4 option? No, they won't. You must have said earlier you must plant. There must be separate trees. Can you plant trees in a commonage? No, you can't. I wouldn't generally do this, but just a particular farmer said I didn't receive his first payment on the fodder scheme, and he's rang and he hasn't got an answer. So if you could send in an email just with your details to the fodder email address, fss@agriculture.gov, and we will certainly look into it, because we've paid most people that are due to be paid. What schemes can you apply for without the need for an advisor? My acre is too small to afford the cost I used to, and I was getting a payment, whatever. So obviously, if you want to apply to acres, you must employ an acres advisor, who is someone who is an FAS advisor, and they've also attended the acre specific training. Outside of that, there's no restriction on you as an individual yourself applying for all the schemes that we're talking about tonight, BISS, ECO. You can apply for them online. If, however, you don't wish to apply for them online and you want to get an advisor, there must be an FAS approved advisor, the list of which is up on gov.ie and which we update regularly. So make sure your advisor is FAS approved. Can you apply for the agri-environment scheme and an acre scheme? I imagine they're saying, can you apply for the eco scheme and acre scheme? Yes, you can. Then this question, I imagine, is how do you calculate the eligible area of a boundary hedge or stone wall? I presume they're talking about the space for nature percentage that I touched on earlier. So back to page 19 of the BISS terms and conditions, it's a notional area. All you simply have to do, either with the indicative estimates we've put out, if they're right, you're accepting, so to speak, and submitting that they're right. That has already calculated the area for you. If you want to add in a new feature, so as Thomas mentioned, you want to draw in a new 100-meter hedge, you just simply have to draw in the linear length. You don't have to worry about calculating the area. The thresholds that we have in terms of multiplying the weightings by 10, we'll do that based on the additional features you've mapped in. However, important point, as Thomas touched on, like if you as a farmer or whoever might be at 20 or 25% space for nature already, and you're confident that that's a good broad assessment of what exists in your holding, there is no need. We can't stop you doing it, but there's no need to be going off adding in another 5 meters of hedgerow that we missed, or 12 meters of hedgerow that we missed. Okay, Mary, maybe one more before I come back to you. Oh yeah, is tree planting as a designated practice in AP6? Is it 6 trees per hectare or 6 trees per farm to qualify for 2 practices? So it's 6 trees per hectare. And then, can you apply for acres and eco schemes together? Yes, you can, as we said already. If the farm is 100% ANC designated and the satellite assessment says you do not qualify for space for nature, are you entitled to the eco scheme or not? So there's a range of eco schemes. We went through 11 in total. But if you already know your space for nature percentage, I'm assuming you've looked it up on BISS 23 already, you're going to see under eco schemes all of the practice that you're already eligible for. So, well, we don't have your application for this. I'd be fairly sure you will qualify for more than just the space for nature percentage one, or the AP1. Does own mountain count the same as commonage for the space for nature? So any features that are on ground, particularly if it's on commonage or say privately owned mountain, if there is, for argument's sake, scrub or stone wall features on them, they'll all get mapped, but they'll all get the same weight, and we don't make any distinction whether they're commonage or whether it's on privately owned natura. Is there a separate acre scheme from the agri-environment scheme in BISS? So I'm presuming you mean is acres and eco separate schemes? Yes, they are. So for eco, as I said, you can apply for that yourself through the BISS that we're talking about tonight, or you can apply an FAS advisor if you so wish. However, if you're going into an acre scheme, a separate acre scheme, you must employ an acres advisor to do that for you. A question here on the AP3, the limit in chemical nitrogen, is that optional? Yes, so the limits that are in there only apply if you choose to pick AP3. If you don't choose to pick AP3, then clearly you're not limited by the restrictions for the chemical nitrogen, which are 10% below the national average there. So if you pick AP3, you're limited by them rates, but if you don't pick AP3, then you're not limited by those rates. Can a farmer get eco even if he or she has no entitlements? Yes, you can. They're independent of it. We've touched on the one about the criteria for planting trees already. Oh yeah, my eco scheme space for nature is 16.9%. Do we need to partake in any other actions? So if you're 16.9%, you've reviewed the maps and you're confident that they're right, you've marked in all the correct feature or anything that we had marked in does exist in the ground, then there is no requirement for you to choose any other. And once you're successfully delivered that and are in excess of 10%, all things being equal, you're entitled to your eco scheme payment rate once you abide by the BISS terms and conditions. That's it, Mary, then I think brought up to date. So I'll hand back to yourself, Mary, for the moment.
Thanks, David. Thomas, do you want to come in there with any further questions? And then I'll take a few other questions and hopefully that'll be it for tonight.
Yeah, I'll run through a few there quickly, Mary, and then hand it back to yourself. So is a drain, which is classed as a stream on the maps, eligible as a landscape feature? So I think maybe David touched on this, but basically payment-wise, natural features, streams, rivers are not eligible for payment, and man-made structures, land drains, as I suppose we call them, or ditches, they're eligible for payment. So yeah, it depends basically what you have on the farm. Another question here, farming the burn. The farm is 57 hectares and they have a current MEA at 34. Can they now apply for the full 57? The short answer is I don't know without seeing the maps and the way the land is laid out and where it is. But the best thing would be to, you know, if you go into the INET, the application system there, and the system will have recalculated the new eligible hectare value and presented to you. So you or your advisor can have a look at that there. Is it okay to do a control burn on designated land outside of the breeding season? So if it's designated land, control burning is an act requiring consent. So it would be something that you would have to discuss with the National Parks and Wildlife Services. So even in let's call it the open period, is something that requires consent. A question regarding a strip of forest that was felled and can't be replanted. Can this be reclassified? So the first thing is just to be, again, this is more with the forestry side, but as you're probably well aware, if you clear fell land, there is a requirement to replant. So if that replanting requirement has, if you've had discussions with the Forestry Service and they have acknowledged it shouldn't be or can't be replanted and you're going to replant somewhere else, and then the land is basically left at the moment fallow, yes, then that land can be presented again. Obviously, you would have carried an activity on it, so whether that be, you might put grass back into it or maintaining it or using it in some capacity. So depends on the detail, but there's nothing to say it can't, but again, the detail is important. Have a field with old outcrops of rock and trees that doesn't have a parcel and its number, and it's beside a bigger parcel that of land. Can I I suppose the question here is, can I claim them? But yes, as long as again that you own both of those land parcels, you can add them on the system and ask for them to be merged. And then once they're merged together, depending on the area, if it's less than 50%, well then that area of scrub or rock will become part of the eligible hectare value. Okay. Question here, if an existing road is closed in and returned to grass, will be eligible for payment? Yeah, so look, if something is grassed over and has been used for an agricultural activity, there's livestock using it, that look, there's no issue with that. There's a question here more on the activity side of the thing, but do you need sheepy of commonage? No, not explicitly. You don't have to have sheep, you declare commonage, but if you declare commonage, we'll be asking you what you are doing on that commonage. So again, it doesn't have to be livestock, but there has to be you have to have some role in that commonage, some maintenance activity being carried out in it, okay? There's a question about habitat parcels not appearing on the maps have come out. So note that any land that you declare in 1 year will and should appear on your pre-printed maps the following year, unless there's been an issue in terms of dual claim or some difficulty in that way. But so it should be there. Mary's outlined already some of the contact details for the department, so you can come back to us with that, maybe with details of them, we can have a look at it. So crop type is grassland, but the only options I'm seeing are, permanent pasture with multi-species forward and different variants, I think is what the farmer's getting at here. and they're saying they have all of them within the one plot or one parcel. So the system will allow, through something called temporary subdivisions, if you have different crops within a field, to mark those areas off by means of something that's called temporary subdivisions. And again, there's an instructional video available online that you can use to help you with doing that. So again, I'll do two quick ones here then to finish up, and then I'll hand it back to Mary. Farming activity, what is it? Can you cut silage, mulching, or topping without having livestock? Absolutely. So there is no requirement to have livestock. You have to maintain the agricultural area by carrying out an activity, and whatever appropriate activity you choose is fine. And as I already said, if there are situations where, for climate, biodiversity, or environmental reasons, land has maybe been rested for a little bit, or doing something a bit different, perhaps rewetting or something like that, they're all acceptable. And the only condition, if it's a more long-term thing where land hasn't been used over many years, then that has to be applied for in advance, and there's a form available for that. Last, then, if cattle had no access to fenced-off scrub area last year, will cattle need free access to scrub area this year? So no, those areas of beneficial features that I talked about, those areas of scrub, once they're within that parcel and we have mapped a scrub, it's not a requirement that the livestock can access or get into them. They have to be part of the parcel, all right, but it's not a requirement that the livestock are actually going through the scrub for them to be considered a beneficial feature and held potentially eligible. Okay, I'll leave it at that, Mary, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Thomas. I'll just take a few more questions. Can a leasee get a leasee to activate a claim entitlements on their behalf? So there's a good few questions in on entitlements. So I would urge you to register for the webinar next Tuesday and attend and put your questions to that session. We will share obviously these questions with the presenters for next Tuesday, so they will be ready to answer your questions. Next question then, if I have 10 hectares, what's the minimum livestock requirements? Is it the same for sheep, cattle and goats? So for 10 hectares, what's the minimum livestock requirement? So the minimum stocking requirement is 0.1 livestock units per hectare. Is it the same for sheep, cattle and goat? No, it's not, because they all have different coefficient livestock coefficient values. So the livestock coefficient values are set out in Annex 4 of the terms and conditions. But just to give you an example, if you have 10 hectares, then you would need 10 dairy cows, because dairy cows their coefficient is 1 livestock unit. So if you have 10 hectares, you need 10 dairy cows. Then whereas sheep and goats are at 0.1 livestock unit per hectare. So if you have 10 hectares, then you would need 100 sheep in order to satisfy the minimum livestock requirement. But again, there's further information on all of the animals that are counted towards the stocking requirement, and the coefficients are all set out in Annex 4 of the terms and conditions. Then is it just the BISS subject to the 66,000 cap, or is ECO brought into the calculation? No, it's just the BISS, it's just the basic income support for sustainability. So just the payment entitlements that are capped at the effective rate of 66,000. So the ECO scheme is not included in that cap. Then what is the rate per hectare for A and C? So the rate per hectare for A and C depends on the category of designation, whether it's a category 1, which is traditionally the higher category of constraint, the hill land, or whether it's the less intensive type land that's farmed. So there's 4 different categories. So the payment depends on the category and on the number of hectares. So the first hectares are paid at a higher rate. So there's a lot of different payment rates depending on all those scenarios. And the payment rates are set out in section 6 of the BISS terms and conditions. So I would urge you to look at those and to contact the direct payments help desk if you have any further questions on the ANC payment rates. But also just to say that there's no change to the ANC payment rates in 23. So whatever you got paid last year for ANC, if your land hasn't changed, you'll receive at least that again this year. Can you go to Portlaoise to fill in your form? Yes, you can. The reception is opened in the Portlaoise office, but we'll also be having the in-person farmer clinics around the country in April and May, so you don't have to come to Portlaoise, and we will advertise those clinics at a later date. So then the help sheet is not included in the map or the BISS pack. Yeah, so that wasn't included in the letter that issued over the last number of weeks. A further letter and the help sheet, the brief guide, will issue over the coming week. So you will receive another letter and the help sheet will be included in that letter. Question, how can you get 2 CRISS payments if 2 separate hard numbers in a partnership? So to get 2 sets of 30 hectares rather than 1 30-hectare payment. So this is a partnership, and if it's 2 separate herd numbers, so it's a multi-herd partnership with 2 herd numbers, then yes, you can receive 2 payments of CRISS. So 2 sets of 30 hectares rather than 1. But if it was a single herd partnership with just 1 herd number, then only 1 set of 30 hectares would be paid on the CRISS. But in this case, if it's 2 separate herd numbers, then that's fine. 2 separate payments of CRISS will be made. I think that's everything from me. David, do you have any further questions to come in before we draw to a close?
Yeah, and there's just a question there, Mary, just at the very end. Maybe you might just come back, and I think there's just a bit of confusion there, just about the 0.1 stocking rate. So I'll just go through the few I have done very quickly. So a question here, is the 1.2 livestock units per hectare stocking rate the maximum allowed for any eco scheme? So it's the maximum allowed where you're choosing enhanced AP2, the extensive livestock. If you're not choosing that option, then you're obviously not bound by the 1.2. If for argument's sake, I want to come in and do AP1 and I want to do the GPS spreader, then I am not bound by the 1.2. But if I come in to do AP2, then and the enhanced option, I'm maxed out at 1.2. And if I want to do the standard AP2, I'm maxed out at 1.4. Okay, could you touch on the break crop again? They need to be sown after November 1st. So it's not after November 1st. The break crop must be sown after October 1st of 2022. And it's set out on page 31 of the BISS terms and conditions. And the 4 break crops are oilseed rape, oats, peas, beans, or any combination of those. So 20% of your arable area. Okay, so then just a few more. If I pick Space for Nature's enhanced option and the percentage is downgraded in the future after I've submitted, will I be penalised even though it's a department issue? So this is a really important question. So while the department has mapped and given you an indicative percentage, and if for argument's sake the Buckley farmers at 20%, before I press the submit button, I have to be confident that those features exist on the ground and that I'm happy that they do exist and that the lengths that are marked are correct. And if they're not correct, so we've either marked too much or too little, that's your opportunity to go in and correct them. But when you press the submit button, or your advisor on your behalf, your FAS advisor, you're committing that these features do exist on the ground. However, as Thomas touched on and I touched on earlier on, once you're in excess of 10%, even if you're at 20% and whatever happens, either inspection our side or a ground inspection, you fall to 15%, 16%, that's largely irrelevant once you're still in excess of 10% for that enhanced option. Okay, can we set hedges in multiple rows? So I'm presuming you're talking about AP4 in eco scheme. So in which case, if you're setting it, the actual detail is set down in the terms and conditions, but it's 5 plants per meter in a double row. That's the first thing. But you can, if you want to plant your 100 hectares. And you're going to do the metre per hectare, i.e. 100 metres of hedgerow, you can choose to do that in one long length of 100 metres if you so wish, 250s, 425s, that's entirely up to yourself. But what you must do in 2024, so if you choose it in 2023, you plant it, you deliver it, in 2024, you must come in on your BISS application and mark the actual features of where you planted that length of 100 metres or the 425s. Hi David, I missed a lot of the webinar. Can I go back on it again? Oh yeah, so as Mary said, so this in the coming days, all the slides and this recording will be put up on gov.ie, so you'll see the detail of it then, the full thing. Does the setting of a hedge cover you for all years? So if you choose AP4, and I'm just going to stick with the hedge, the 1 metre per eligible hectare. So if I have 100 hectares and I commit to planting 100 metres in 2023, that is one of my 2 ag practices in 2023. I'll get paid for it, all things being equal, once I deliver the commitment in 2023. I must maintain that hedgerow for all of the next 5 years. It's part and parcel of repayment. You do not need to plant another 100 metres in all subsequent years unless you're applying individually for it again for AP4 in 24, 25, 26, etc. Another question, does all the lime have to be spread in the second year in acres? I'm presuming you're referring to does all the lime have to be spread in the second year in eco? No. So if you come in and you do AP6, which is soil sampling, you must take a soil sample on a maximum of 3 hectares. That's the first thing. Where there's no lime requirement, then you're obviously not bound by it. But where there is a lime requirement, you must commit to spreading all of that lime, at least 33% of it in the first year, but all of it over the course of the 3 years. But if by virtue of the fact there's not a lot of lime, for want of a better word, to put out, there's no restriction in you putting that all out in the first year. Our check will be that you have spread at least all of that over the course of the 3 years, or that will be one of the checks, should I say. And then last one, Mary, on my side. So if an internal stone wall is half down on the ground, i.e. broken down and not stockproof, is it okay for payment? So I presume you're referring to, in terms of eco, in terms of it being one of the features that contributes to a farmer's space for nature. So ideally, yes, we'd all love to have perfectly stockproof stone walls, but in reality, many of them are broken down. So once the stone wall is in existence and it is a visible physical stone wall, albeit it may not be stockproof, that's perfectly eligible in terms of a feature to be mapped for space for nature. I think that's it, Mary, for me for the moment anyway.
Thanks, David. And yes, sorry, I said the wrong numbers even though I'd written down the correct ones. But anyway, apologies for the confusion. 10 hectares would be 1 dairy cow would meet the minimum requirement, or 10 ewes, because 1 ewe is equivalent to the minimum stocking requirement. So hopefully that clarifies. I think it's getting late if we're starting to make mistakes, so we might leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and for all your questions. They're very useful for us all, and we will use them to inform the frequently asked questions document. For the questions that we haven't covered on the other topics, I just remind you to register for Thursday's webinar on conditionality, on area monitoring system, geotag photos, protein aid and the strong corporation measure, or to join next Tuesday on entitlements, the National Reserve, and the Young Farmer Scheme. So do join. The links are available on the same link where you registered for tonight's webinar. And thanks to Thomas and David as well. And thank you for all for joining.